believe in traveling light. I can't do this just yet. I almost feel sorry for these doomed sea dogs.
You must halt this invasion at once.
Our command and the Burning Legion have returned to Azeroth. Sorry, wrong story.
Before we begin, thanks for all the responses to the Kerrigan video. I knew she'd be contentious, but the discussion surprised me. She was divisive when the games first came out, and evidently she's still divisive now. There were good counter-arguments, some of which have changed my callous heart. You'll never convince me she had to go to Calder in the first place, but perhaps I let my biases color my perception of her. Granted, it's a video essay, there'll always be bias, but for Amon and his boys, I'll try to be more impartial. Some folks suggested that it was wrong to see Sarah's journey in Heart of the Swarm as a redemption arc, but instead an arc of purpose. And you're right about one thing, she definitely didn't redeem herself. Perhaps combining gameplay with the story analysis isn't fair. Shouldn't be an issue with Amon though, man barely shows up in game. Some of the feedback wasn't even about Kerrigan. I didn't think my Tau joke was that bad, but for the sake of the greater good, I promise I won't ever use it again. In light of your wise words, I'll move Sarah from D tier to C tier. Mid-character overall, I still like her Brood War self. Anywho, on to the main event. When starting this series, I figured I'd slowly ease into each character, really build it up. Honestly, I put Mr. Space Squid on the pole as a joke, but it seems you maniacs prefer jokes, so it's time for the big shadow god himself. And also Duran and the Hybrid, I wasn't sure if they'd get enough attention on their own. Is it practical to put all of these characters in the same video? Nope, but it's my video, I do what I want. Amon isn't usually well regarded in StarCraft 2. Narud, pretty okay. The Hybrid, they look cool, I guess, but why is that? Why is the big bad stuck at the bottom tiers? We'll go as follows. First the Hybrid, then Duran, and finally Amon. Like last time, I'm just a guy giving his opinions. Feel free to write a 5-page essay as why I'm wrong. I'm ignoring the novels and going off the games unless I say so.
How dare you ignore the novels? The lore is there, whether you like it or not.
Most of the cutscenes will be from other sources because, actually I did get a better laptop, but I may as well save time with these downloaded clips. Laziness, am I right, fellas?
Die in the name of Amon. No, you.
While the concept of assimilating the Protoss first spawned in Episode 2, Protoss-Zerg Hybrid were formally introduced in the secret mission Dark Origins, where Duran revealed he'd seeded them on countless worlds. Back in 1998, their existence was ominous and vaguely malicious.
You will never find them all before they awaken. And when they do, your universe will be changed. Forever.
But StarCraft is a game of factions with different ideologies and viewpoints. The Zerg were initially seen as mindless beasts engineered by the Confederates, only to reveal their true intelligence to us through the Overmind and the Cerebrants. The Conclave saw the Dark Templar as heretics, only to be surprised at their nobility during the fall of Iron. And Infested Kerrigan pulled the rug out from everyone repeatedly in Brood War. And change itself can be good, bad, or a little bit of both. So what kind would the Hybrid bring? Timeline-wise, the hybrid make their first proper
I
appearance on
believe in
Jakku.
traveling light.
A guy named Mars controlling the Preservers and their guards. Well, the actual subtitles just call him Hybrid Protoss. He talks about despair and tries to stop Zeratul from learning about the prophecy. While most of his insults are your standard villain threats about doom and inevitability, they echo an attitude from their master Amon. To him, the Protoss and Zerg aren't complex individuals or factions. They're just tools. Kinda like your average RTS player, huh? In a future vision with Kerrigan dead, entire legions of hybrid control the swarm to consume the universe. Their master is a guy named Dark Voice, but is later revealed as Amon. On Castanar, it's revealed that Mengsk is breeding them too, with one such creature breaking free and pursuing Raynor and the boys. To Blizzard's credit, I think this makes a good first impression for the hybrid race. They're intimidating, unstoppable killing machines that outclass anything the Protoss and Terrans can throw at them. Though I do hope we get to meet more distinct, fleshed-out hybrid characters with more varied personalities. Wait, that's it? In Art of the Swarm, Narud's connection to them is revealed. This was confirmed in Flashpoint, but we're only looking at the game, so it doesn't matter. He's breeding more on Skyger under the guise of helping Mengsk. Several individuals have developed the unique adaptation of inducing headaches to Kerrigan.
Leave me alone!
That's a joke, they're draining her psionic energy. It'd be a real shame if they ever pushed this stick again. I mean, get 20 of these guys and we have no shot. Wait, it only shows up here? Disclaimer, it kinda shows up in a sinister turn when Mars draining the Preservers, but otherwise I don't think the hybrid ever really do this again. Stukov and Kerrigan later speculated that the hybrid used the energy taken from her de-infestation to fuel Amon's resurrection. Anywho, more hybrid interfere with Kerrigan's beam war with Narud, I'll get to that later, but it's not until Legacy that they fully emerge from the shadows.
Impossible. Hybrid on Ire.
Not just Ire, buddy. Shakuris, Korhal, not Glacius oddly enough, Ulnar, Cybro, Slayn, Revanskar, and Ire again. There's all sorts of interesting designs, including Green Guy, Red Guy, and Squid Guy. I'm kidding, they actually do look kinda cool. Void Thrashers are, just Void Thrashers. I don't think they count. Aside from serving as occasional bosses, their role in the story is mostly to serve as symbols of Amon's hypocrisy and vanity, and material for his new body. He wants to end the Xel'Naga cycle, but also makes a corrupted form of it to his liking. He claims to end all suffering, yet inflicts it through his plans. He cares nothing for any of his followers except the hybrid, and even then, they're only valuable as extensions of him. Beyond that, the hybrid just kind of disappear after the host, presumably having all died off. And I have to say, a common criticism of the hybrid is that they're basically the Burning Legion from Warcraft, just a vague evil threat that makes the heroes unite to stop it. Of course, since I played StarCraft 2 first, this wasn't as big an issue for me. My real issue is that they'd never really go beyond that initial role. Ever since Brood War, the hybrid seemed like they'd be a groundbreaking new addition to the universe, and to their credit, they do break some ground. They control Protoss and Terrans, wreak havoc, wipe out worlds, but I can't help but feel like there could have been more to them. They're a combination of the Protoss and the Zerg to create an entirely new being. What would this new race be like? If you mixed a Kala and a Zerg together, could that create a being connected to both the Kala and the hive mind? Would the different consciousnesses be distinct or mixed together? What would that look like? How would they think? Would all of them be inherently malicious? Perhaps it's merely my own expectations not being met. Kinda like Amon. But I think it prudent to compare this to other factions. StarCraft is a series all about them. In the past, the Terrans and Protoss feared each other, but worked together in the end and gained newfound respect for each other. The Conclave painted the Nerazim as evil, only for the so-called heretics to cripple the Swarm and give shelter to their persecutors. Rohana feared the Purifiers, but they showed they were far from the killbots everyone believed them to be. Even the Tal'Darim and Primal Zerg showed complexity beyond just being fanatics or space dinos. So imagine my surprise when the hybrid ended up just being evil. No real complexity, just... Oh, you just want them to turn good. No, I'd like them to have depth. Purely evil characters tend to be pretty forgettable. Why do you think guys like Abathur or Alarak are so highly regarded? Aside from being entertaining, of course.
You think us fools?
Yes, but that is irrelevant.
Apart from being Amon's lapdogs, the hybrid are just here to be stronger enemies. Perhaps that was always the intention. Perhaps they really were just designed to be Amon's enforcers, but if that's the case, it's a shame. Evil comes in many forms. Mengsk isn't the same kind of evil as, say, Abathur, but there's no distinct hybrid characters outside of Mar. And while it plays into Amon's whole shtick of taking away identity, it's a letdown that for all their build-up and potential, the hybrid are just glorified boss units. They have some cool spells, I guess. Mara has a cool voice. Otherwise, D tier. Duran. Our shifty boy first shows up in episode 5, posing as a Confederate resistance fighter. He gives the UED a hand, and they go on their merry quest to destroy the Dominion and conquer the sector.
Gentlemen, I recommend that you launch this attack using the utmost caution.
Duran presents himself as a friendly, knowledgeable fellow with a hint of pragmatism by siding with the UED. But even with his persona, the cracks begin to show.
Surely, Vice Admiral, you don't doubt the tenacity of your own fleet.
Over time, he starts acting sketchier. On Tarsonis, he pushes to destroy the Psi Disruptor rather than use it against the Zerg. And he forgets to call Dugall an Admiral.
Disgraceful.
From the start, both Dugall and Stukov have their reservations about Duran, since he's selling out his fellow Terrans to Earth's government. Ironically, the good Admiral is the one who sides with him when things go south later on. After advising the captain on the invasion of Korhal, Duran screws over the UED by letting the Zerg overrun them, saving Mengsk and Raynor in the process.
Sorry, sir, but it seems your signal's fading out. I couldn't make out that last part.
The obviously fake excuses he gives lead to Stukov going rogue and getting shot before he can reactivate the Psi Disruptor on Braxis. Now, I already went over some of the issues with his betrayal and Stukov's death in the Kerrigan video. It's more an issue with presentation, given the fact that the player sees all of this, but we're stuck on mute, so we can't actually tell Dugall anything. Just know that Stukov, the captain, and Dugall could have easily resolved all this with one phone call. But Pi, Duran must have been mind-controlling or influencing Dugall. Well, maybe. It's open-ended. Could be influence, could be Dugall being terrible at communicating. We'll never know. Though given the later reveal of Duran's power, it does seem a bit odd he doesn't go for Stukov too. Regardless, his allegiance is revealed and he flees with Kerrigan. With his affable but treacherous nature, ambiguity and manipulation were a large part of the original Duran's appeal for me. Like Kerrigan, he was interesting for his ability to play sides while pursuing his own agenda. Not necessarily for shooting lightning beams, but we'll get to that. For the rest of Brood War, Duran continued his work while posing as Kerrigan's lieutenant, where he provided several strategies to deal with the Swarm's foes. He may be a scientist, but he's also a soldier.
The resulting explosion will be the perfect cover for retrieving the matriarch.
Or it could, kill her. That was definitely possible too. As Kerrigan claims victory on Char, Duran slips away unnoticed. On a dark moon, Zeratul finds several Protoss and Zerg captives in the stasis, awaiting transformation into the hybrid. Hidden from view, Duran reveals his true nature and allegiance.
I am a servant of a far greater power. A power that has slept for countless ages, and is reflected in the creature within that cell. For I have seeded the hybrid on many, many worlds. You will never find them all before they awaken. And when they do, your universe will be changed. Forever.
I'll hand it to Blizzard. This was a really cool setup back in 1998. I believe they call it mystery box storytelling. For 12 years, we were left wondering, what was inside Duran's box? Who was he really? What master did he serve? And how would the hybrid change the universe? 12 years later, we'd get our answer. Was it a good one? We'll get to that. Duran next appeared as Dr. Remus Nerud. Scratch that, Emil Nerud. Lime Duran. He poses as head of the Mobius Foundation, which is searching for several Xel'Naga artifacts. Hiring Raynor's gang, they beat up the Tal'Darim for the magic rocks. Kerrigan confronts him and Raynor on Tyrador, where we get some more hints about his identity.
I've seen through your Dr. Nerud's pathetic charade.
That Queen of Blades really is quite a nuisance, isn't she?
Nerud later shows up in Skyger, breeding more hybrid. Officially, they're for Mengsk, but obviously they're Amons. Nevertheless, his plan to fight Kerrigan is to have his hybrid drain her psionically. He spends the rest of the mission spouting generic threats about how the Swarm has outlived its usefulness and we have no hope. He's still smug, I'll give him that. After the battle, Kerrigan and Stukov determined that Narud and the Hybrid used the artifact to bring back Amon by collecting energy from the Queen of Blades. Further underground, Narud shouts that Kerrigan knows nothing about the Xel'Naga and shoots lightning at her. Then she shoots lightning back and, Bro, what is it with every character using lightning in StarCraft 2? Like, even Karax gets in on it. Now, some people pointed out that Kerrigan flying makes sense because she has psychic powers. Fair enough. In theory, she could also taunt Mengsk with fart noises because she's a telepath. That doesn't make it any less dumb. As Professor Grant once said, this feels like a Dragon Ball Z fight. Visually, it more resembles a duel from Harry Potter. And not the fun creative one between Voldemort and Dumbledore, I mean the boring tug-of-war ones between him and Harry. I actually like both series, not ruling herself, rest in peace Toriyama. But this is StarCraft, and for me, this feels a little out of place. But it's a matter of taste. Some people might think this tastes fine. I am not some people. Moments like this are symptomatic of the overall approach in StarCraft 2, whereas the original games were generally more grounded. In the sequels, it's a bit more bombastic. Obviously, there'll be fights, it's an RTS, but those were armies clashing. And yes, we did get more fantastical scenes like Tazadar's collision course or the Xel'Naga temple going off, but crashing a ship into your enemy or setting off an ancient super weapon happened in cinematics outside the regular game. It's not the same as having two characters blasting each other with giant beams across the map. Now don't get me wrong, I quite like some of the action scenes in the sequel, such as Kerrigan's Dream and the Protoss invasion of Aiur. Props to the teams who worked on them, that feels like StarCraft, just mass armies fighting across worlds. You may have guessed by now that my main issue with Narud is that he's less of a sneaky, infiltrating schemer in the sequels. Instead, he's like Mar, another evil guy who works for Amon, says it's hopeless to beat him, and shoots stuff at you. Some might say he's dropping the subtlety to finally kill Kerrigan. True, probably could have kept some of it. In fairness, I will give Blizzard this much. It's fitting that Stukov is the one who screws Narud over on Skydir, given his previous betrayal and torture of him. I may not love the sequels, but they have their moments and they have their characters. Psst, if y'all vote for Alarak or Abathur next, you'll hear nothing but praise from me. Anyways, Kerrigan confronts Narud, who taunts her that Amon's back. Then he turns into Raynor and drops another magic rock on her. Doesn't work this time. Kerrigan then tries eating him with a Nidus worm, and I know it's possible, but it also looks dumb. Anyway, she punches Narud a bunch, he pulls an IMU before stabbing Kerrigan, who stabs him back, killing his mortal form. Not sure how to feel about Narud these days. A lot less subtle, though that's the overall approach with the sequels, I suppose. He gave some smug taunts, fired a beam at Kerrigan, became Raynor, became Kerrigan, got stabbed. Also, it's really funny that his green form is voiced by Artanis.
Strike the hive while they are in disarray.
Today, we will retake what we have lost.
And they sadly didn't call him Duran. I'm gonna have to take off points for that.
Samir Duran.
Never mind. We next see Narud in Legacy's universally well-received epilogue, where it's revealed he's also a Xel'Naga. You know, I'll say this, compared to Amon and Oros, Narud's design at least stands out. It fits given how much smaller and snake-like he is compared to his boss. He's ultimately just second fiddle to the Shadow God, and by this point is relegated to babysitting fake Tazadar. Regardless, Into the Void is actually my favorite epilogue mission. You get to fight alongside the other two races and secure positions while carving a path to Narud himself. And to top it all off, we get the satisfaction of beating the crap out of him with our army before Stukov executes him.
Good night, you son of a bitch.
Cheesy as it is, it's fitting that Narud dies at the hands of a man he betrayed and tortured. So while I ultimately didn't find Narud the most interesting villain in the sequels, and he loses a lot of the subtlety from before, I will hand it to Blizzard that he at least gets two somewhat fitting defeats. Firmly in C tier.
Your newfound strength gives you no advantage here. I have fought and killed Xel'Naga before.
I am Duran.
At last, Mr. Shadow God. It'd be easy for me to just call Amon a flat generic villain who's evil because he's evil. Stick him in FD or call it a day. But in the interest of fairness, let's take a closer look. Amon doesn't appear in person until Wings of Liberty, but his influence is felt retroactively throughout the series, so it's important to go over some of these events. In Episode 2, the Overmind echoes much of his ideology about total control over his subordinates and achieving perfection.
Then shall we be the greatest of creation's children. We shall be perfect.
The goal of assimilating the Protoss is revealed later on to be Amon's purpose for the swarm. By creating the hybrid, he aims to make himself a new body and to spike the Xel'Naga. We'll talk more about that later. Now, I already spoke at length in the Kerrigan video about why I'm not a big fan of Amon being behind the Zerg. TLDR, I liked Mr. Eyeball better when he was just science gone right, and Kerrigan better when she was a hero gone wrong. No need for a bigger bad, people made mistakes, bugs followed their programming, having some other guy behind it all diminishes their accomplishments. At least for me. Regardless, in Episode 3, Zeratul confirms that the Swarm's origin is the same as the Protoss, the Xel'Naga. The Overmind grew beyond their control, but aimed to finish what they started, the assimilation of all life. The first true hints at Amon's existence start in Dark Origins, where Durand speaks of serving a greater power, one behind the creation of the hybrid that aims to change the galaxy permanently. As I said, this was big. Who was this mysterious master? What did they want? How would they change the universe? Amon finally shows up in the prophecy missions. Zeratul learns that he caused the Swarm's rampage and plans to dominate them if Kerrigan dies. Using the hybrid and the Zerg, Amon is prophesied to end the universe in utter darkness. He wipes out the Protoss, then consumes the Zerg. Wait, do the Protoss still have the Kala in this mission? As mentioned, Amon himself makes it clear that he views the Zerg and Protoss as tools. Not actual people or races, but pieces on a board. Otherwise, the rest of his lines are him gloating about his plan and telling us it's useless to resist. Not the deepest character, but they're building him up. Moving on to Heart of the Swarm, Amon finally gets a name. Fun fact, I used to say it as Amon, like Korra, now I just say it as Amon, like StarCraft. Nothing to do with the segment, I just thought it was funny. On Char, Isha reminds Kerrigan of her plan to prepare for Amon's return by securing the artifacts. On Xeris, Kerrigan learns the Hive Mind was created by him to control the Zerg, and that the primal Zerg escaped because they were overlooked. On Skyger, Kerrigan and Stukov determined that the artifact was meant to use energy from the Queen of Blades to resurrect Amon. Narud confirms this, meaning after her pit stop at Core Hall, Kerrigan has to go beat him next. So we're 2/3 of the way through the trilogy. We know Amon's behind the hybrid and the swarm and plan to use them to consume and remake the universe. He views his creations as tools and only values them because they're his possessions. His servant Narud has manipulated the Dominion and Tal'Darim to fuel the hybrid project, and the artifact was used to bring him back with the power stolen from Kerrigan. Now most of this stuff is stuff we've been told about him. The big man himself has been off-screen most of the trilogy so far, though to be fair, he's been dead. So not terrible, but not super interesting so far. Pretty by the books, destroy everything kind of villain. Thankfully, Legacy of the Void would like a word. So how was Amon in the third game? He's finally doing stuff. He takes over the Kala at the start of the game, seizing the Golden Armada for himself. Using Artanis, he slays the Prelate Zeratul and uses Selendis as a puppet, giving Artanis a personal stake in stopping him. Amidst the chaos, the Daylon flee the planet aboard the Ark ship. The first half of the game centers around finding and awakening the Xel'Naga to beat Amon up, allowing us to explore the nature of these mythical beings. Turns out all the tampering with the Protoss and Zerg went against the Xel'Naga's approach of non-interference. They were never meant to ascend to Xel'Naga. Now that's pretty huge. The so-called special races of the galaxy were only special because of Amon's plans. Not that they get much time to process that, because the Xel'Naga are dead, so the heroes switch to finding a way to free the Templar from Amon. All well and good, I actually like that they didn't just have a Xel'Naga to solve all their problems for them. Hope they stick with that. Now, despite his increased presence, Amon still has a bit of a problem. As I mentioned, much of what we learn about Amon is exposition from other characters.
What I cannot understand is why Amon would cast aside his loyal allies so easily.
The dark truth is, Amon wishes no allies, aside from his hybrid.
Now, exposition isn't necessarily bad, but a general rule of thumb is that it's better to show and not tell. In Legacy, it's mostly told by Rohana, and it's a problem that was apparently acknowledged by the writers. Since Mr. Squid is stuck in the void for the entire series, it's hard for the audience to really know what he wants or why he wants it. Many of his scenes consist of him using Rohana as a mouthpiece to tell the protagonists how he's gonna bring order to the galaxy, or taunting them about how their history is a lie and it's pointless to struggle against him and they'll all die.
I offer a gift. Release in oblivion.
He even reveals his plans to Artanis, though that one was a trap at least, I'll give him that. Not the most compelling antagonist. He's no Mengskar Kerrigan, that's for sure. At least they could be entertaining and charismatic at times.
With our enemies left unchecked, who will you turn to for protection?
I'm pretty much the queen bitch of the universe.
And they had style. But Amon's a dark god who does stuff behind the scenes. Now, this wouldn't be too bad if we had a middle management antagonist to talk to, you know, kind of like Darth Vader to the Emperor, the Saruman or Nazgul to Sauron. Someone in the field that Artanis can bounce off of regularly. Hey, there's Narud. Oh, he's dead. Aldarak, he joins our party pretty quickly. What about Malash? Shows up in 4 missions, then dies. And the Hybrid are no help. They have even less personality than the Lash. In fairness, Legacy of the Void's main focus is uniting the factions resisting Amon and exploring the characters who represent them. But this means that Amon himself doesn't really get that. He's not the focus. Fair enough, it's not his role, but it also means he's not the MVP. I don't play Legacy because of how cool or interesting Amon is. I played for Alarak, obviously. That being said, one interesting aspect of Amon that I've noticed is identity. Loss of identity. We see it in his fixation on total control through the Kala and the Hive Mind. The lack of complex characterization for the Hybrid further compounds this. Likewise, his armies have little personality, merely extensions of his will. Interesting in concept, but in practice you just fight a sea of red minions, while Amon or one of his lackeys occasionally taunts you about his superiority.
Your crusade has failed.
Speaking of which, turning red was a problem as far back as Heart of the Swarm. Since our main enemy was the Dominion, most of the enemies were Red Terrans. Then Legacy of the Void rolls around and there's more Red Terrans, Protoss, and Zerg. In general, there's no direct antagonist to face except for Malash briefly and Amon when he rings us up. Man, they really could have used Niadra for Amon Brood. Regardless, the heroes confront Amon on Ire. There's 2 cool scenes where he messes with Vorazun with some Exorcist stuff and Artanis with the UI. I quite like that, but otherwise, he just spouts more taunts about the Kala being a lie and how the heroes are too late. Also, as ominous as his host form is in the cutscenes, the actual design is,
I thought he'd be taller.
Thankfully, the heroes battle his host form and strike it down before... Wait, we actually don't fight him? Huh. Ironically, while I don't like all the over-the-top action in StarCraft 2, I figured they'd at least give us the satisfaction of blasting this man ourselves. Beating up characters has been a thing since StarCraft 1. In fairness, it's cool to see the Daylon fleet shoot the squid out of him. Left hostless, Amon desperately throws what's left of his minions at Artanis, before the Keystone is activated and he's pulled out of the Templar, being thrown back into the Void. But they don't stop there, as Kerrigan proposes that they finish him off in the Void itself. Smart move, Amon will probably show up again in an expansion if they leave him be. After Oros is freed, he passes on his essence to Kerrigan, who confronts the big bad, and I'm sorry, have I mentioned how much I don't like the Xel'Naga designs? I understand the intention to make them Cthulhu-esque, but in practice they look like blobs. Amon looks like melted ice cream. He looks like he could be a marketable plushie. He looks like a placeholder. He looks like a model whose textures failed to load. He doesn't look powerful or intimidating. He looks ugly as... Hold on. Part of Amon's character is how he was allegedly forced to be Xel'Naga, and hates what he is. Yo, if I got uploaded into this garbage, I'd want to wipe out the universe too. Brilliant. Everyone, I've changed my mind. Amon S tier, 10 out of 10 character design. Blizzard, you geniuses. You've done it again. Anywho, the final mission is to kill 7 rocks. Riveting. Interestingly, Amon reveals his past here.
I was forced to become this, just as you were. Torn from everything I knew.
All that murder and conquest was out of spite and self-loathing? Huh, that's actually interesting. I really hope we can explore more of that. Nope. Well, that was Amon. You may have noticed that while I don't like him, I also don't feel as strongly about him as I do about Kerrigan. Perhaps it's the advantage of not being present in the original games. I don't really have an older version to compare him to. Unless you count the Overmind, but they're different characters. The version of Amon that we get... Well, I may not like Kerrigan in the sequels, but I at least remember the moments I dislike. Amon, he's just there. For all the mystery behind Duran's master, he doesn't stand out as an antagonist. There's some interesting ideas they float around, but ultimately he's here because he needs to be. A powerful big threat behind most of the bad stuff in the series who forces everyone to unite. Perhaps that's what he was always meant to be, someone who isn't deep, someone who lacks the capacity to change, unlike our good hierarch. It'd be reductive to say he's evil because he's evil. That is the popular image of him. There's motivation and personality there, just had to replay the games to recall. He's self-righteous, manipulative, narcissistic, hypocritical, and petty. Very petty. He was forced to become a Xel'Naga, allegedly, and uphold their infinite cycle. So he set about to break free of that and impose what he believed a perfect universe should be, leading to untold amounts of destruction and death. Ironically, in his attempts to mold that universe, he does exactly what he hated the Xel'Naga for, and accomplishes exactly what he set out to stop. So he has a character, just not one worth remembering. D tier.
You guys all think you're so much better than me.
I'm gonna be honest, I can't fix Amon. It'd be insane to take on the challenge of rewriting him at all. Any changes to him would have massive impacts on the story. Ultimately, I think it more productive to compare Amon to some of our other antagonists, see their strong points compared to him. Mengsk, at least in the original game, is a very real antagonist. He's a revolutionary turned megalomaniac who betrayed his allies.
I will rule this sector or see it burnt to ashes around me.
Yet he presents himself as humanity's savior.
I shall watch over you.
But unlike Amon, he's not an obviously evil monster. Not initially. On the surface, he's charismatic and friendly, offering aid to the likes of the Magistrate and Raynor. Only in private, underneath it all, does he reveal that he's a smug, self-assured control freak.
You're making a terrible mistake. Don't even think to cross me.
He's too proud to admit defeat or failure, and his paranoia ends up being his undoing. But while he may be a crazy, genocidal dictator, at least he got style. I've already gone over why I loved Brood War Kerrigan so much. We watched her fall from grace and descent into sadism and betrayal. We saw her feign change, only to sink deeper and deeper into villainy. She makes things personal by brainwashing Rashikal and having the player kill Phoenix. While Amon guts Zeratul in a cutscene, bro, imagine if we had a segment where we actually had to kill him in-game. Now that would hurt. Brood War Kerrigan owns how horrible she is. She is both despicable and entertaining with everything she does. Also, she may be a backstabbing genocidal murderess, but at least she got style. Amon may play at being God, but the Overmind succeeds because he is one. When he speaks, you feel like it's the will of an ancient hive mind.
Awaken, my child, and embrace the glory that is your birthright.
His eloquent speeches are reminiscent of the Old Testament God.
That is my covenant with all Cerebrits.
As you progress, he even pumps you up in his own buggy way.
For you grow more cunning with each passing battle.
Yeah, I'd serve in his form. Not like that, not like that! And to top it all off, despite being a literal brain, he has the benefit of having an iconic look. The creepy, lidless Sauron eyes staring into your soul. Now that is the form of a god. It'd be unfair of me to only bring up older antagonists. I may never love the sequels, but they have things I like. Alarak not only serves as a useful look into the Tal'Darim, but as a great foil for Artanis, being a far more ruthless and cutthroat warrior. He has many of Amon's traits, arrogance, ambition, being red, but he can also be reasonable, wise, and even vulnerable on occasion.
You do not see through the agony of knowing all you believed in is a lie, and that your only solace is found in the destruction of your betrayer.
Even in Nova Covert Ops, he serves as a dangerous frenemy for the titular Ghost, sharing a common goal but also outclassing her, psionically and physically, while caring not for the struggles of the common man. Also, he's funny.
For creatures with such short lifespans, you Terrans are always so eager to die.
And he may be a backstabbing warlord, but at least he's got style. Now, this is just a theory, but I believe Amon doesn't stand out, at least for me, because he doesn't quite go to the same extremes as the other antagonists in the story. He's not nearly as grounded as the likes of Mengsk or personal as Kerrigan. However, he's also not nearly as alien or transcendent as the likes of the Overmind, and in terms of banter, he's certainly no Alarak.
Yes, but that is irrelevant.
He's in a strange middle ground where he's immensely powerful, influential, but also incredibly petty and spiteful. And as a result, the more interesting, extreme personalities drown him out. Also, he's got no style.
Actually, Amon was an S-tier Giga-Chad supervillain who was super memorable.
Alright, enough talking about Amon. I don't know how long I want the series to be. I doubt I'll be able to do every character. I have neither the time nor energy for that. But I don't want every video to be negative. I want to add something positive for once. And as I said, there are elements in the sequels I actually like. So here, choose one of these dudes. Alarak, Donnie, Abathur, you'll hear mostly positive stuff about them. Shoutouts to Gladys Marino, Appy Acrid, Jen Tuong, Michael Phillips, and Mike Pierce for supporting the channel. Feel free to leave a like or dislike, subscribe, or comment below. Maybe Amon truly is an S-tier character worthy of praise. Or maybe he's lower than D-tier. Regardless, thank you for watching.
It's hard to cast a spell with a blade in your throat, isn't it?
Do you guys actually think I'm a bum? Because I was thinking about this recently and I was like, man, like, yes? But okay, well then my follow-up question is, if I'm a bum, what do I need to do to improve myself? You go outside, I already do that. Exercise, I do that. Shower! I shower! Get a job! I'm not doing that. Dress better? I'm not even joking. I feel like I don't know how. Like, I've said this before, I only have like two kinds of outfits. The first one is like today, which is like League of Legends player. The second one is like cosplayer trying to dress normal. Cause like the clothes that I like that are normal clothes is like, I like skirts, I like long socks, I like cute tops, button downs, but then I just look like I'm trying to cosplay. Like when I wear like the button downs, people come and they're like, was she cosplaying? And I'm like, oh. Do you guys actually think I'm a bum? Because I was thinking about this recently and I was like...
So if you take a coin and you flipped it 1,000 times, you might still get 60% heads. But if you flipped it 5,000 times, the probability gets closer to 50%. The sample has to be large enough to take luck out of the equation. This is for you.
Are you depositing a penny?
No, I want to make a withdrawal. $4,200. Well, how much does that leave us with?
In checking, a little over 4.
Make it 6 then.
6.
8?
Are you sure?
8,000. Thank you, Mitch.
By the way, a bunch of us are pooling money for the lottery tonight.
We're not lottery people.
You know, there are some people who blow thousands on those things.
Alright.
Here we go.
What's your
You do fast. Yeah.
Ooh. So if you take a coin... Yeah.
Hello. Hello. Going?
You remember to live.
Avengers Endgame is terrible. This appears to be an unpopular opinion for reasons which frankly do not elude me in the slightest, but nonetheless tempt me to walk into a lion enclosure wearing trousers made of steak. The path we're about to tread is a scary one, wrought with pain.
Damn. Stay sharp out there. Can't do this just yet. Well fought, Oak. A shame we have only the trees for audience. do this just yet. This got me good.
Painful revelations regarding our culture's baffling indifference towards good storytelling. Positivity and optimism will be fleeting going forward. This isn't the fun boat, or the fun train, or the fun aeroplane. Am I being overly dramatic? Absolutely. Is talking about a dumb superhero movie in exhaustive detail a worthwhile use of mine or anybody's time? Probably not. But then again, shut up, let people hate things. I feel compelled to push back against the seemingly prevailing notion that Avengers Endgame is a good film, because frankly, I do not want Endgame to set a precedent for what films ought to be. It concerns me that a film with an utterly nonsensical plot, moronic characters, and horrendously broken world building is currently ranked higher on IMDb than WALL-E, Django Unchained, Raiders, Aliens, The Father, Die Hard, Citizen Kane, and Unforgiven. When I first watched Avengers Endgame, I thought it was alright. Being a somewhat fan of the MCU, I entered the theater excited and left with a smile on my face, having experienced all the feelings I imagine the creators of this film wanted me to. Put simply, I liked Endgame, but, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, it's become clear to me that a lot of my positive feelings about this film were almost exclusively derived from the things it did which appealed to my monkey brain. The novelty of these characters interacting with one another, the jaw-dropping spectacle, the simple and unchallenging jokes. Avengers Endgame is an easy film to enjoy, but only if you don't think about it. Stories are not scenes in isolation. They are not just the payoffs or a string of cool moments completely divorced from one another. A story is a sequence of events. The sequence matters. How the events are connected matters. And it's here where Endgame completely falls apart. It's almost astounding how little sense this film makes. From the characters to the world building, I can't think of any single component of this film which is without flaw. This is the worst Avengers film. Yes, even worse than Age of Ultron, which I guess would make it about as bad as Zack Snyder's Justice League. Now I realize convincing some of you of this assertion is going to be harder than selling fire insurance to a long-tailed carpet shark, but unlike my New Year's resolution to finally finish my goddamn novel, I'm entering into this endeavor with a lot of confidence. What I hope to illustrate today, dear viewer, is that Avengers Endgame is broken, but more importantly, that there is no reason it needed to be. I can sympathize with how challenging it must have been to create a film like Endgame. I don't doubt that everybody involved in its production worked very hard to make this film all it could be. However, much of what's wrong with Endgame comes down to the writing, the most fundamental component of any story, and one which isn't contingent on money or technical limitations. That's what's so frustrating about Endgame. It could have been great. Many of its components certainly are. The performances of the cast are excellent, the soundtrack is terrific, and at times, this film is a visual treat. But the screenplay is the story. And the quality of the writing in Avengers Endgame is, excuse my French, fucking abysmal. Before I get into explaining why, I'd like to take this opportunity to preemptively address some of the criticism I expect to be levied at this video. Be warned, the following few minutes will feature high levels of needlessly cruel snark. Wow. Imagine seriously critiquing a stupid superhero movie. I'm glad you agree this movie is stupid. Seeing as we appear to have reached the same conclusion, I suppose there's no reason for you to continue watching this video, so do feel free to piss off. Oh, come on. Yeah, the time travel mechanics in this movie are dumb, but they're clearly not an important part of the story. Well over a third of Endgame's runtime is devoted exclusively to time travel related scenes. Several lines of dialogue are dedicated to explaining how time travel works in the MCU, and the stakes of the story hinge on time travel. Might be that we're simply using different definitions of the word important, but in my defense, I'm using the actual definition. Oh yeah, like you could do any better. You might be right about that, but my psychiatrist insists that I shouldn't be so hard on myself. To that end, I've elected to be harder on other people instead, you hypothetical lobotomized ceiling fan. I doubtless haven't accounted for every piece of criticism to be proffered in response to this analysis. And hey, if I get things wrong, feel free to point it out. But if there's one thing I may ask of you, it's that you simply allow me the chance to present my arguments without immediately writing them off as stupid or pointless because this is a comic book movie, or because you personally enjoyed watching it. To further speak to this sentiment, you may have noticed that this here video is, long. The first half of this critique is dedicated mainly to breaking down the plot, with the characters being the focus of the second half. I recognize that not everybody is going to be as enthusiastic as I am about dissecting the time travel mechanics of a superhero movie, so if you don't really care about a thorough breakdown of the plot, feel free to skip around to the sections which may be of more interest to you. I'd prefer that you watch the whole video, but hey, your computer or phone, your choice. To be clear, I'm not here to steal your feelings. If you like this movie, good for you. However, I'm also not in the habit of acting like a film with problems doesn't have any because of its genre. I've seen the best of what this genre has produced. Superhero movies are entirely capable of being great stories in their own right. Into the Spider-Verse and Civil War demonstrate as much. Avengers Endgame is a poorly written film, but it did not need to be. To understand exactly where and how this film goes wrong, we first need to take a step back and examine the circumstances of its creation, as well as its place within the MCU. Some are quick to label superhero films as completely devoid of merit. Given how many of them are crap, the prevalence of this viewpoint doesn't come as much of a surprise to me. That said, I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a nifty idea. The franchise's present status as a money-making juggernaut has obfuscated just how innovative and risky the MCU really was. It's the first of its kind, a film series which marries the strengths of long-form storytelling with the production values of blockbusters. The pioneer of the shared universe format, no other franchise has come close to dethroning it. But, if we're being honest with ourselves, the MCU hasn't exactly set the bar all that high. The neat aspects of the shared universe format of storytelling are patently obvious. A narrative told over dozens of films rather than 2 or 3 presents an unparalleled opportunity to take multiple characters on the types of lengthy journeys formerly found exclusively in serialized TV shows. Plus, seeing characters from different film franchises come together to fend off bad guys is just cool. But these benefits are tethered to a significant trade-off. One, which the creators behind the MCU have neglected to account for most of the time. With each new installment in the MCU, the writers must account for more plot threads, more lore, and more characters, because each new story brings with it implications which will invariably ripple across the series. What happens in one movie matters in another. For better or worse, it's a quintessential double-edged lightsaber. The shared universe format of storytelling relies on continuity, and the quality of the MCU's world building has been highly sporadic at the best of times. Phase 1 was probably the most coherent era of the MCU, likely because things were simpler back then. The writers didn't have to think about the mystical elements of Doctor Strange or the cosmic worlds of Guardians and Captain Marvel. The earlier films also didn't have to account for the presence of other heroes because the Avengers didn't exist yet. The challenges which come with constructing a coherent shared universe hadn't yet arisen. The longer the MCU went on, the more apparent it became that completely self-contained stories simply didn't make sense anymore. One was forced to ponder why Steve didn't show up in Iron Man 3, or Tony in The Winter Soldier. The broader world demanded acknowledgement, and that acknowledgement eventually came in Phase 3. The MCU got exciting during Phase 3. The potential of the shared universe format was beginning to be realized. The likes of Civil War and Homecoming leveraged the world in which they existed to enhance the drama and to propel their leading characters forward. Infinity War was, in many ways, the culmination of the efforts made to interweave these characters and their stories with one another. Much more ambitious in scope than Age of Ultron, Infinity War capitalized on the films which preceded it to tell a huge story about a cast of largely well-realized heroes clashing with a terrifying yet understandable villain. A villain whose means of affecting his will upon the universe was steadily introduced to us throughout the preceding decade. The MCU was probably in the best place it had ever been leading up to the release of Endgame. For all its issues, Infinity War laid down all the necessary groundwork for a stellar conclusion to the Infinity Saga, one which not only delivered on a grand spectacle, but also much needed resolution, and the full realization of the strengths of the shared universe format of storytelling. And, well,
You blew it! You had it all and you blew it!
Avengers Endgame tricked people into believing that it was the peak of this storytelling format, but in truth, it's a fucking waste of a movie. It squandered potent character drama. It discarded the logical consequences of Civil War and Infinity War, and it left the MCU in a very unsound place from a world-building perspective. How is that, you wonder? Well, I suppose I've kept you in subpar suspense for long enough. Let's begin. The statements, I'm going to write a time travel story, and I'm going to invade Russia during the winter, have a lot in common. It seems like such a foolproof idea at first, but before you can say, sacre bleu, your story is in tatters and/or your entire army freezes to death on the way back to Paris. Look, I get the appeal of time travel stories. I really do. There's something innately interesting about the idea of traveling backward or forward in time and using the knowledge you alone possess to become the most powerful agent in that world. However, And this is just a friendly piece of advice that you don't have to take, but I would highly encourage you to at least consider if you plan on writing a time travel story. For the love of all that's good, honest, and true in this world, please put some fucking thought into it, or alternatively, don't even try, give up. Time travel tends to work well in stories when it's either a central element of the plot and the subject of thorough exploration, or if it simply enables the story to exist and then becomes a non-factor thereafter. Basically, it's an all-or-nothing paradigm. Explore it thoroughly, or get it out of the way as quickly as possible. But there is a third option, in much the same way that breaking your own leg with an elephant's rib is a viable alternative to either buying or renting a home. What is this third horrific way? To put it simply, the third and horrendously torturous way of telling a time travel story is to introduce it as a game-changing mechanic at the 11th hour to completely reverse and thereby undermine the consequences of prior story beats. Endgame is nothing if not fully committed to the third way. It's so committed to the third way that it cooks her breakfast every morning and massages her stupid feet. Before we can dive headfirst into analyzing Endgame's laughable time travel rules, I need to address the arthritic Galapagos tortoise in the room. I began working on this little project before Loki sprung forth into the world with the grace of an intoxicated Japanese spider crab, and I have elected to completely disregard everything that show has contributed to the MCU canon because it has only made things worse. According to Loki, the sacred timeline is controlled by 3 robot space lizards who themselves are controlled by Kang. There is no such thing as free will in the MCU. It was Kang all along. Everybody who ever makes an incorrect choice, that being a choice Kang doesn't like, is melted by the time variant authority. Whichever timeline the offending party came from is then promptly erased from existence. And by erased from existence, I mean sent to the end of time to be eaten by a purple cloud dragon called Sephiroth. Alioth.
Oh, jeez. Sorry. Keep going.
There is no multiverse, or at least there wasn't until a version of Loki called Sylvie stabbed Kang in the gut. Up until that point in the MCU, there were only alternate timelines which exist briefly before being deleted.
This universe is only one of an infinite number.
Whoops. Apparently, new timelines are created by something called a Nexus event. They are not created when an individual travels back in time, nor are they created by the removal of an Infinity Stone from the past as the Ancient One claimed.
The Infinity Stones create what you experience as the flow of time. Remove one of the stones, and that flow splits.
Instead, they're created by variants whose existence makes no sense to me because why would anybody make any choice at any point in time which creates a new timeline? Why wouldn't that just be what happened the first time around? For whatever reason, the Avengers are not considered to be variants by the TVA because they were supposed to travel back in time to fuck with things. But 2012 Loki was a cosmic mistake, even though said cosmic mistake was created by the Avengers and directly influence the actions of the Avengers in a way that Kang is clearly okay with, seeing as he never intervened during Endgame. I guess 2014 Thanos, Nebula, and Gamora are legitimate variants who were supposed to exist as well. Also, Infinity Stones can be removed from a timeline without consequence because the TVA has done so several times. They use them as paperweights. Oh, by the way, don't tell me in response to my forthcoming criticisms that whatever timelines the Avengers went to were pruned. That's a nice way of saying that their inhabitants died horribly at the amorphous hands of a giant purple gas dragon. All that carnage is the fault of the Avengers for recklessly creating alternative branches. These are just a few of many reasons why I'm pruning Loki from this analysis. Regardless of the influence Loki demonstrates the TVA to have over time and space, the Avengers were completely unaware of their existence and thus unaware of their activities. They couldn't have possibly known that the TVA was cleaning up after them. As far as the Avengers were concerned, their plan was essentially airtight, which cannot be the case no matter which story's time travel rules you accept as being canonical. However, the main reason why I'm not going to factor Loki into this analysis is because the show has established that free will did not not exist in all the MCU films up until this point. That's just a terrible story decision, and one which I don't care to entertain, because if I did, all criticisms of any film in the MCU could be deflected with the response, well, Kang did it. Loki does not support any single time travel theory. None of what it introduces makes a lick of sense. The show only serves to hurt Endgame and the broader MCU. It's not going to factor into this critique at all, because if I had to account for everything Loki introduces, I'd have to preface every statement with, if things hadn't gone this way, the Avengers would have been melted by fascist space lizards. Wait, that's... hold on. It's not going to factor into this critique at all, because if I had to account for everything Loki introduces, I'd be forced to preface every statement with, if things hadn't gone this way, the Avengers would have been sent to the end of time by Kang the Conqueror's space fascist lizard front organization to be consumed by a purple dragon cloud in order to preserve the sacred timeline from becoming a mess of branches which would inevitably go to war with one another and destroy the multiverse. So, swiftly moving along, the time travel mechanics in Avengers Endgame are completely and utterly broken, but to truly understand just how absurd the time travel scenes in this film are, we need to go back to basics. You can't expect to build a Dyson sphere if you still find yourself stumped by the concept of doors. So, please take your seats, turn off your phone, shut the fuck up. Class is in session. I'm Professor Fringy, and this is Time Travel 101. Stories about time travel tend to feature one of three distinct rule sets. 1. Traveling back in time effectively creates an alternative reality which continues from that point. Changes made to the past cannot affect the time traveler because the future they came from no longer exists. Think Terminator. 2. A time traveler enters the past but remains tethered to the future, and any changes they make to the past affect them in real time. This is how Back to the Future operates. 3. A time traveler from the future cannot change the past because their interaction with the past already happened. Essentially, the time traveler was always present in the past. This is sometimes called temporal mutability. That was a lot. Let's slow it down a bit to ensure that we're all on the same page. The alternative timeline mechanic is the most straightforward of the three. If traveling back in time creates an alternative reality, the future is no longer relevant to the story. That future has either been deleted or exists but is inaccessible. Time travel in these stories kicks off the plot and nothing more. Terminator and T2 function well as time travel stories for this very reason. The coexisting timelines mechanic is a little more complicated. In stories featuring this mode of time travel, the grandfather paradox becomes relevant. It's possible for a time traveler to delete themselves from existence. And from a storytelling perspective, paradoxes are basically plot holes. If you delete yourself from existence, you wouldn't have gone back in time to delete yourself from existence. So then you would have gone back in time, and then you wouldn't have, and then you would have, and so on and so forth forever. Certain stories grant you the ability to infer what would happen in such cases. For instance, in Back to the Future, I think you could reasonably assume that had Marty failed to set the past straight, he would have been deleted from existence and the world would continue from that point as normal. Back to the Future is also advantaged by having all this occur before Marty was born, which grants the story a lot more wiggle room in which to operate. Looper is a much worse example of this coexisting timelines mechanic. In that film, it's shown that injuries sustained in the past are dealt to the future version of a character in real time. But that doesn't make sense. If your leg gets cut off, it wouldn't just poof out of existence. You'd grow old without that leg, which would completely change your future. What's important to understand about this mechanic is that there are no alternate realities. Everything takes place in one universe, for better or worse. Most of the bad time travel films adhere to this rule set. The temporal mutability time travel system is by far the most complicated one, and I personally find it can be quite difficult to grasp. Let me give you an example of how it works. Imagine Bob builds a time machine in 2021 and travels back to 1900. Chronologically, 1900 Bob existed before 2021 Bob used the time machine. Whatever Bob did in the past was already baked into the present in which Bob originally lived. In a certain sense, he hasn't traveled back in time because he already existed chronologically at that point in time. This basically means that all time has already happened, and so any time travel related conduct has already been accounted for within that universe. Again, somewhat complicated, but this is probably the most technically sound way of telling a time travel story. The problem posed by this system is that it's just plain difficult to write for, and there's something to be said about whether this system strips away some of the fun aspects of time travel as a concept. The alternative reality mechanic is the simplest from a narrative standpoint, and the Back to the Future mechanic is probably the most useful one for playing around with the past and the future in fun ways. But ultimately, it doesn't matter which system a writer chooses. What matters is choosing one rule set and sticking with it. The time travel mechanics in Avengers Endgame make about as much sense as the Schlieffen plan, primarily because this film cannot make up its mind on how time travel works in the MCU. So, we're gonna have to tackle this film's explanations in chronological order if we're gonna stand any chance of getting somewhere with this analysis. The first scene about time travel is kicked off by Ant-Man, who theorizes that time travel may be possible through the quantum realm. The reason why he believes this to be possible is because the 5 hours he spent trapped in the quantum realm amounted to 5 years on Earth. And how did Scott escape from the quantum realm? Well, you see, a rat just so happened to press a button on the machine sitting in his van and released him. This is what one might call an, astronomically unlikely coincidence. Why? Well, if Ant-Man hadn't entered the quantum realm just a few seconds before Thanos wiped out half the universe, and then been subsequently released 5 years later by a curious rat, the Avengers wouldn't have thought time travel to be feasible, they wouldn't have built a time machine, and the snap wouldn't have been undone. So, we're off to a fantastic fucking start. Shortly thereafter, Bruce provides us with our first explanation on how time travel works in the MCU.
If you travel to the past, that past becomes your future, and your former present becomes the past, which can't now be changed by your new future. You are
This sentence is absolute gibberish. It means nothing, it tells us nothing, it's pretty much just lampshading masquerading as an explanation. First, if you travel to the past, that past becomes your present, not your future. You are now present in the past. This means one of two things. Either your conduct in the past may result in you being deleted from existence, which I don't think Bruce could reasonably rule out as a possibility, or it doesn't affect you, which means you've either traveled to or created an alternative timeline. Being the thick idiot he is, what Bruce fails to understand is that interacting with the past necessarily changes the past. This is inarguable. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this. Clint travels back in time, picks up a baseball glove off the ground, and returns to the present with the glove. What happens when a person from the past goes to pick up that baseball glove as they originally did? The only answer to this question is that they don't pick up the glove, which means the past has been changed. What this means to the person who traveled back in time depends on the rules at play. One possibility would be that by interacting with the past, they've deleted themselves from existence. This would affirm the coexisting timelines rule set. In other words, they never left their universe. The other possibility would be that they haven't traveled back in time, but rather they've traveled to or created an alternative timeline in which that glove no longer exists. No matter which rule set you think applies in Avengers Endgame, there are issues, and the film doesn't commit to either explanation. It pays lip service to the idea that it has rules which the world follows and a procedure which the characters are following, while blatantly disregarding the very notion of cause and effect. When present Captain America fights past Captain America, what exactly happens after present Cap leaves 2012? The time he traveled to doesn't cease to exist, it keeps going. Do not tell me they create a self-contained bubble in time. We know this isn't true because we see several times during this film that time goes on even when the time traveler has has left the past. If nothing has changed upon their returning to the future, there is only one explanation for what is happening in this film. The Avengers aren't traveling back in time, they're traveling to or creating alternate realities. And no level of charitability can conceal the problems this explanation presents. The film itself doesn't acknowledge that these are the rules it's playing by. There is a strong implication throughout the film that the Avengers aren't changing anything, but the changes they're making to at least one, but probably 4 alternate realities are very substantial. Removing Thanos and his entire army from 2014, for instance. Guardians doesn't happen in this reality, which probably means that Ronan won and blew up Xandar, so all that blood is on the hands of the Avengers. But in Loki, they said that it doesn't matter what Loki established regarding the TVA or Kang, because the Avengers didn't know that the TVA or Kang exist. They would still be morally culpable for the consequences their actions may have brought about. Frankly, I don't think Marvel's plans with Loki were even considered when they were making Endgame, given how much of this film directly contradicts Loki. In other words, fuck Loki. We're not talking about Loki. Here's a question I'd like answered. Is it even possible for the Avengers to return to the exact same past timelines they initially visited? If going back in time the first time created an alternative timeline, why would going back in time again send you to that timeline rather than create another new timeline? Oh, fucking hell, say time 10 times. If that's how time travel works in the MCU, the Avengers completely screwed over the other realities they took the stones from. Again, even if we discount the explanation provided by Loki, that the people in these timelines died horribly at the hands of the purple fart cloud dragon, the Avengers would have still unwittingly brought about a lot of suffering to these innocent timelines by rendering them incapable of using the stones to defend themselves. Many of these questions could be answered if Endgame more definitively explained how time travel works in the MCU, but it's clear to me that the rules were left vague on purpose. Nevertheless, the time travel rules the film establishes in Act 1 are explicitly contradicted in Act 2. This is the consequence of impressively incompetent writing. When Bruce meets the Ancient One in 2012 New York, she states that the removal of an Infinity Stone from the past is the catalyst for the creation of a new timeline, not the act of time travel itself, or seemingly even the act of directly influencing the past. The logic here is that if the Avengers return the stones after using them, no new timelines will be created. I use the word logic loosely, what with that being, you know, completely fucking illogical. Captain America didn't fight a future version of himself and fall down a flight of stairs in the main timeline. Peter Quill didn't get knocked out on Morag in the main timeline. Thanos exists after 2014 in the main timeline. The Ancient One's explanation is still not an explanation. If this represented the full extent of Endgame's time travel mishaps, it still might have functioned as a time travel story. Maybe. The heroes would still be incredibly irresponsible for recklessly screwing around in alternative realities, but the existence of these new timelines could have at least explained why changing the past didn't change their present. But then Captain America went back in time and got old. This unassuming scene single-handedly obliterates the time travel mechanics of Endgame. The Avengers didn't go to or create alternate timelines. They directly influenced the past which created them, because Cap went back in time and never returned to the present via the time machine, yet still exists in the same universe. He was always there, which means that everything the Avengers did in the past occurred within their own universe, which cannot be the case if the present they return to was unchanged. So yeah, it's over. The time travel scenes in this film make zero fucking sense. No, Cap traveled to a different timeline and came back to give Sam the shield.
Look here! Look, listen!
Bruce says that Cap flew past his time code, which means he did not use the time machine to get back to the present. God, even with only a few minutes of runtime left to spare, Endgame keeps trucking on ahead and breaking itself in new and creative ways.
You have to return the stones to the exact moment you got them. You're gonna open up a bunch of nasty alternative realities.
Right. On several occasions, the film explicitly states that these stones must be returned to the exact moment they were taken from. This is very impossible for several reasons. I'm curious to see how Cap managed to return these stones to where they came from. I guess he held Jane down and injected her with the ether again. That's nice. I suppose he flew back to Vormir and dropped the Soul Stone in a puddle. I imagine bumping into Red Skull all the way out there probably came as a bit of a surprise to him. The Space Stone can only be accessed by destroying the Tesseract, and the Space Stone was retrieved from the 1970s as the Tesseract. So, how exactly did Steve return the Tesseract to where he got it from? And follow-up question, how does the past progress precisely the same way as it did originally if the Tesseract doesn't exist? That's a rhetorical question, obviously. The answer is that it can't. By the way, here's something a little awkward to ponder. I'm gonna go ahead and assume that duplicate stones existing concurrently are going to mess with the fabric of reality, what with the fact that they control it. Cap has all 6 Infinity Stones in a briefcase at the same time. How can he return each stone to where they came from when they were removed from the past at different times? Again, rhetorical question. The answer is that he can't. There will always be duplicate stones unless he makes round trips, which we know that he didn't. Oh, and by the way, to reiterate the point once again, these timelines are beyond salvation. Thanos doesn't exist anymore in the 2014 timeline, so that one's been permanently altered. The 2012 timeline has been changed substantially because Loki escaped with the Tesseract. The 1970 timeline has been changed substantially because the Tesseract no longer exists as a cube, and even the 2013 timeline has probably changed owing to Jane Foster having the ether sucked out of her and I guess put back in by Cap. Do you understand how nonsensical this all is? What I find frustrating about trying to broach this subject is that I know there'll be people scrambling to argue that subsequent stories will address these issues, as though that's a meaningful response to anything that's just been said. Besides, Loki tried and failed to address these questions, all the while creating brand new problems like a complete absence of free will in the MCU, or this completely bullshit idea that it's possible to screw with the past in ways which don't create tangential timelines because the change being affected on the world isn't substantial enough. Avengers Endgame serves as the finale of the Infinity Saga, so I think it's perfectly fair to assess the film with reference only to what came before rather than what comes after. This film was supposed to provide answers, not generate new questions for subsequent stories to address. The time travel in Avengers Endgame just fucking sucks.
So Back to the Future's a bunch of bullshit?
Yeah, you can fuck yourself.
So, the time heist is the plan the Avengers concocted to retrieve all 6 Infinity Stones from the past. After spending some time brainstorming ideas, the team arrived on a very smart and not at all stupid plan. Tony, Steve, Scott, and Bruce will return to New York in 2012 and grab the Space Stone, Mind Stone, and Time Stone. Thor and Rocket will return to Asgard in 2013 and grab the Reality Stone. And Rhodey, Nebula, Natasha, and Clint will return to Morag and Vormir in 2014 and grab the Power Stone and Soul Stone. The team also concludes that they have one shot to get the stones because they only have enough Pym particles for a single round trip. Does that make sense to you? It shouldn't. Am I to believe that during the planning phase, not one person raised their hand and asked, can we just go back in time and get some more Pym particles? I feel like that's one of the first questions any reasonably intelligent person would have. The time heist almost failed because the Avengers didn't have any spare Pym particles. Even if we were to assume that it was impossible for the Avengers to get more Pym particles, the plan they settled on is asinine. The Avengers could have picked several better moments in the past from which to retrieve the stones. They should have gone back to Thanos' garden hut and cut off his hand before he destroyed the stones. That would have given them all 6 in one foul swoop. One might say that plan is a little risky, and you're right. It is a little risky. Not quite as risky as going to 3 different timelines, thereby giving you only one chance to get the stones, but still risky nonetheless. A somewhat safer option would have been to go back to Wakanda in 2018 to kill Thanos before he removed the Mind Stone from Vision. That would have given them 5 stones immediately, and all 6 after allowing Shuri to safely remove the Mind Stone from Vision's head. The Avengers also could have gone back to Titan in 2018 and knocked Quill out while Tony and Peter were removing the gauntlet from Thanos. That would have delivered them 4 stones, and even if Doctor Strange proved uncooperative, they simply could take those 4 stones back to the future and gather the remaining 2 from different points in the past. Even if one were to insist that all these proposals are too risky, I'd like to highlight just how risky it was for the Avengers to send their entire team back to the past, thereby rendering it impossible for them to try again if any one group failed at their mission. Sorry, I can't stand it any longer. This whole plan is insane!
Insane, I tell you!
Alright, class 2 is in session. Basic mathematics with Professor Fringy. 10 people are sent back in time with enough Pym particles to return to the present. So it's safe to conclude that there are 20 Pym particle canisters available to the Avengers. One round trip requires at least 2 canisters. Why at least 2? Well, traveling to 2 different points in the past and returning safely requires 3 canisters, as you only need 1 to move between 2 points in the past. Traveling to 3 different points in time requires only 4. So, as you can see, it's more efficient to send one person to several different points in time than it is to send several people to 1 point in time each. This is a surprisingly important detail to remember, because what it tells us with absolute certainty is that even if the Avengers didn't think to get more Pym particles from the past, and even if the Avengers felt it was too risky to retrieve all the stones from Thanos himself, they still settled on the least efficient plan possible. Sending everybody back in time means that even a single mistake derails the whole mission, as was almost the case with the Tesseract in 2012 New York. Conversely, if the Avengers were to send a team of, say, 5 people back in time, all 5 of those people could have traveled to the 3 chosen points in time and returned safely, or alternatively, one person could have dropped off at each jump with the stones in tow, meaning there would still be at least enough Pym particles left for one person to go back in time and return safely if anything went wrong. The time heist represents Endgame quite well, if you ask me. It is so poorly conceived. To be clear, it's not strictly a problem that characters in a story don't make the most optimal decisions. However, when characters who are supposed to be incredibly smart make the absolute worst decisions possible, we're no longer dealing with an understandable lapse in judgment. The time heist the Avengers settled on is perhaps one of the dumbest ways in which they could have gone about getting the stones, but it was the best way if the goals of the writers were to have the second act of this film operate as a nostalgic highlights reel. The time heist is one of the clearest cut examples of pandering winning out over logic that I have ever seen. Speaking of which, the Ride of the Rohirrim is an excellent scene, so I can completely understand why the Russo brothers would want to emulate it with the final battle in Endgame. That said, I feel it's important to mention that the Lord of the Rings is based on the medieval period. You know, a time when air support, tanks, and artillery pieces didn't exist. Epic charges are cool and all, but when you have access to guns and the primary mode of attack available to your adversaries is punching and biting, a full frontal melee-oriented assault is pretty fucking stupid. Why do I get the distinct impression that any modern military could have obliterated Thanos' army in less than 10 minutes? I feel like one would get the job done. But nah, fuck that. Let's charge the enemy line, guys. We don't need M1 Abrams and F-15s to fight space dogs. We've got weapons from the fucking Neolithic period. It's like deploying kamikaze pilots against an army of beached tuna. The seagulls in Finding Nemo demonstrated superior tactical acumen than the Avengers. I feel compelled to once again reiterate that several members of the Avengers are supposed to be among the smartest people people on Earth. The battle begins with 2014 Thanos rolling up on Avengers HQ with his giant spaceship. The only reason why this is possible is because 2023 Nebula allowed herself to be captured by Thanos, who then tasked 2014 Nebula with infiltrating the Avengers and using their time machine to pull him into the future. But had Nebula just teleported back to the present the second she realized that something was wrong, that would have been the end of it. Thanos wouldn't have been able to travel into the future and retrieve the gauntlet. She was already about to leave. What in the hell was she doing? But in any case, 2014 Nebula boots up the time machine and Thanos' massive ship arrives in the present. And by arrives, I mean punches a giant hole in the roof of Avengers HQ. Am I to believe that Avengers HQ doesn't have an early warning system or a security protocol which can't detect that the ceiling is gone? Remember that time when the Avengers HQ early warning system, which definitely exists, was so advanced that it could detect some fucking ants on the roof? Thanos then blows up Avengers HQ, thereby conveniently incapacitating everybody except Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor. They fight for a bit, Cap picks up Mjolnir, everybody cheers, and then he gets the shit kicked out of him. For a moment, it seems all hope is lost, until a whole host of portals open and tens of thousands of soldiers hailing from across the Marvel Universe filter in to stop Thanos. I wonder how Doctor Strange managed to assemble such a formidable fighting force so quickly. Even with Wong's help, he only had about 5 minutes to work with. And in that time, he amassed thousands of sorcerers, Asgardians, Wakandans, and Ravagers? What exactly did he tell these people? Were they all just sitting around ready for battle? The Wakandans I can see, but the Asgardians? Did they have their armor and weaponry sitting next to their PlayStations? Also, if Bruce only brought back the people who were snapped, that means half the Asgardians and a good number of the Wakandans are still dead. Yet there are thousands of them spilling through these portals. And by the way, if Thanos wasn't such a brain-dead sea cucumber, he might have thought it wise to rain fire on these guys while they were assembling instead of much later in the battle when his own forces were vulnerable to friendly fire. This one is very much a nitpick, but if the sun is setting on the east coast of the United States, why is the sun also setting or rising in Africa? What is this place, Tatooine? Alright, nitpicking over. Now for the really stupid shit. The struggle for the gauntlets might be one of the most contrived sequences in the history of superhero cinema. The only reason why it happened is because characters who were supposed to be intelligent consistently made terrible decisions. It exists purely for the sake of tension and to culminate in Tony using the Infinity Stones to dust Thanos and his army. This film simply doesn't care to acknowledge that the Avengers have a significant advantage over Thanos in this battle. Doctor Strange is on the side of the good guys. Why doesn't he trap Thanos in the mirror dimension? Ant-Man is on the side of the good guys. Why doesn't he crush Thanos under his boot? Thor is on the side of the good guys. Why doesn't he throw Stormbreaker at Thanos like he did last time? Or am I to believe that's no longer possible because he's fat? You know, perhaps I'm being too harsh. Maybe they didn't have enough time to mull over these ideas. After all, they were too busy collectively agreeing to deliver the gauntlet to Thanos.
Cap! What do you want me to do with this damn thing? Get those stones as far away as possible!
No! We need to get them back where they came from.
I'm sorry, but this is just stupid. The Avengers should have gotten the gauntlet the fuck out of there. Removing the stones from the battle was inarguably the smartest thing they could have done, and it's not as though this would have been that difficult for them to do. Half the team were qualified to do this. The number of means by which the gauntlet could have been taken away is honestly laughable. Give the gauntlet to Thor and have him Bifrost out of there like he Bifrosted himself into Wakanda. Give the gauntlet to Doctor Strange and have him open a portal to fucking, I don't know, Tahiti. As soon as Captain Marvel arrives on the battlefield, it's over. She can fly at light speed, which isn't fast enough to travel the cosmos efficiently, but it is fast enough to get the gauntlet hundreds of kilometers away from the battlefield before Thanos could even blink. Instead, the Avengers decide that it would be a good idea to use the time machine in the van to get the gauntlet to the past. The van, which just so happens to be deep behind enemy lines. I gotta say, I feel like the entire strategy of
Put that thing back where it came from, or so help me.
doesn't make a lot of sense here. First and foremost, holy shit! Even if you didn't get the gauntlet out of there like you should have done, you guys would have been better off pitching a tent on your side of the battlefield, starting up a campfire, and roasting some infinity s'mores. That would have at least forced Thanos to come and get the stones from you instead of having them delivered to him by Captain FedEx. Second, what exactly is achieved by sending the gauntlet through the time machine? You know what, scratch that. How is it even possible for anybody to use that time machine? One needs access to a wrist-mounted device to travel back and forth in time, and Captain Marvel does not have one, nor does she have any pin particles on her person. How in the world is Captain Marvel supposed to get back to the present after flying through the time machine? Also, does Captain Marvel know where those stones are supposed to go? She wasn't involved in the time heist, so where is she going? Where are you guys sending her? Also, numero duo, if one can enter the time machine by flying through it, couldn't Thanos just run through it after Captain Marvel? Also, numero trio, this whole scene can't play out as it does. Captain Marvel flies at light speed. It is physically impossible for Thanos to stop her from getting to the time machine. The only reason he manages to stop her is because she was flying at the top speed of a Ford Model A. Also, numero quattro, couldn't the Avengers have just destroyed the gauntlet, thereby rendering the stones completely useless? Better yet, they could have removed the stones from the gauntlet, put each stone into its own little box, and then dispersed those stones across Earth until they defeated Thanos' army.
I can't take it anymore! I just want to die!
Before I forget to mention this, if power levels ever existed in the MCU, they're gone now. Reduced to fucking atoms. Maybe I was wrong to assume this, but I thought the reason why Thanos was so strong in Infinity War was because he'd acquired the Power Stone. I guess that's not the case though, because Endgame confirms that Thanos sans any stones can take on Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor at the same time. Which I do not believe for a second. I'm sorry, but Thanos is dead. He's super dead. All that's left of him after this fight is a pile of purple jelly. But no, instead Thanos is somehow able to close the distance on Iron Man with his stupid spinning sword to then use Tony as a human shield to deflect Mjolnir. Despite being bedecked in a suit of armor, the impact knocks Tony unconscious when 11 years prior, the comparatively antiquated Mark VI tanked a direct hit from Mjolnir. Had Cap thought to put Mjolnir on Thanos' chest, he could have easily incapacitated Thanos, but he doesn't do that and then nearly dies. I just don't... Thanos, you have two arms. Thanos, please, do something with your free arm. What are you doing? Thanos, you've forgotten that you have two arms. Please do... Oh, yeah, you did it. Good job.
Get the fuck out of the way! I can't see!
Well, that's Tony dead. Well, if that last hit didn't do it. By the way, where is everybody? Where is Rhodey, or Pepper, or Valkyrie, or Wanda, or any number of people whose assistance would be extremely helpful in this situation? Am I really to believe this was the one conceivable way in which the Avengers defeated Thanos? You're telling me that the Avengers lost in the timeline where Captain Marvel flew the gauntlet into outer space? 14 million possibilities, and this was the only way?
But can you see why I'm so fucking angry? Fuck yeah!
Look, I get it, okay? It's cool to see a whole bunch of superheroes on screen at the same time working together to stop the bad guys. It's neat, and it's exciting, but it's also stupid. It's recognizable iconography in exchange for true narrative potency. The opening charge at the Battle of the Black Gate is an example of a charge working on both levels. On a surface level, it's epic as all hell, but it's the underlying story that really makes it so. It's the last stand for our heroes. A final act of courage predicated on the belief that the day will be won, and that even if it's not, at least they stood defiant against pure evil. It's on character, it's on theme, and from a plot perspective, it functions well. Grand spectacles and good storytelling are not mutually exclusive, but if one must be lost, I'd like to think the latter would be the one left standing. It doesn't feel that way sometimes. Do you remember strategy?
All right, listen up. Until we can close that portal, our priority is containment. Barton, I want you on that roof. Eyes on everything. Call out patterns and strays. Stark, you got the perimeter. Thor, you gotta try and bottleneck that portal. Slow him down. You and me, we stay here on the ground. We keep the fighting here. And Hulk. Smash.
I miss strategy. You may have noticed that, thus far, I've dedicated a very small amount of time to the characters of Avengers Endgame. That was on purpose. Why? Well, it's because, difficult as this may be to believe given everything we've discussed, I'm more than willing to look past plot holes and contrivances, even significant ones, if the characters are still great, because character is at the heart of storytelling. The reason why the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been so remarkably successful is because it used to have good characters. The MCU's strengths are not to be found in its world building, as paradoxical as that may seem. The world building in this series has typically been weak, with standalone films routinely failing to adequately acknowledge the broader universe they belong to. Thoughts such as, why isn't Iron Man helping Cap take down the Hydra helicarriers? Come to mind. Plotting has also been a persistent issue with few exceptions. The films in this series with sound plots are greatly outnumbered by the mediocre, bad, and downright terrible. However, the characters, namely the heroes, but also a handful of villains, have consistently managed to pick up the slack. If the MCU didn't have the likes of Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, or Peter Quill, this series would be much harder to distinguish from the DCEU, which has similar world-building problems, but was also completely devoid of any worthwhile characters up until the release of the Suicide Squad. Even when things weren't making complete sense, there was often good drama to be found within the MCU's better films. Iron Man, The Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, Civil War, Homecoming, all these films make great use of their protagonists, with the latter two also superbly utilizing their respective villains and the world in which they took place. And so really, it's no wonder why people like the MCU, though the films have varied wildly in quality. When you look back on this series, it seems as though we were heading someplace great, where a decade's worth of work and character development would fully pay off. And the reason why it was easy to think this is because coming into Endgame, several characters were well positioned for great send-offs. And they screwed it all up. I'm gonna take a moment to preface my criticisms of the character writing in Endgame, since I expect these to comprise the most contentious part of my critique. When it comes to analyzing stories, character can be a complicated beast. I think we're often quick to assume that character and plot are separate components because what they ultimately represent is quite different. The plot is simply what happens, while characters are the conduit between text and subtext, the sequence of events and the emotional value of the narrative. But character and plot are often intertwined. Plot issues may stem from the decisions characters make, or alternatively, gaps in a story's logic may result in characters making decisions which don't seem congruent with their beliefs. For instance, it's a plot issue that the Avengers didn't contact any government bodies when devising and executing the time heist, but it's also an issue which damages the characters, since the Avengers absolutely would have told the governments of the world what they were doing. Plot problems can easily create inconsistencies in characters. Character payoffs are what most of us are here for. That's the really potent stuff we're all looking to see. However, character payoffs do not exist in isolation. The best stories with the most compelling characters achieve their emotional highs whilst being propped up by a sound sequence of events. I know this is an old adage, but it's a good one, and highly applicable when it comes to storytelling. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And if weak characters are akin to houses constructed on sand, Endgame's characters are sitting atop fairy floss, dangling above a black hole. Captain America was assassinated in Endgame, and you cannot convince me otherwise. The reason why I'm so confidently stating this is because Steve is acting largely out of character in this film. And I'm not just talking about the stupid decisions this otherwise intelligent person keeps making. No, that's an issue which affects almost everybody in this film. Instead, I'd like to focus on the decisions Steve makes which completely betrays his core principles in favor of a cheap and emotional emotionally manipulative payoff. Steve has consistently demonstrated himself to be a man willing to lay down his life if it means saving the world, if it means saving one person. He is fiercely loyal to his friends, to an almost self-destructive degree. Time and time again, we've seen that Steve would sooner die than willingly hurt his friends, even when that means dealing irreparable damage to his other relationships. This loyalty could be tied to what I think is Steve's core trait, the one which permeates his entire arc and made him one of my favorite characters in the MCU. Steve is steadfastly principled. He doesn't compromise on his beliefs, even when doing so comes at great personal expense. Given all that, I do not believe Captain America would abandon his friends and his responsibilities in the present because he wants to go on a date with Peggy. Now, one might say, but Captain America has done so much for everybody else. He deserves a good life. You may think Steve deserves a good life with Peggy, and you're probably right, but that is completely irrelevant. It's not about whether other people believe that Steve has earned the right to retire, but rather whether Steve himself believes he's earned the right to retire. Steve does not strike me as the kind of person who believes that his responsibilities would ever come to an end. I really feel like his sense of obligation to the world, and perhaps still to Erskine, would compel him to remain involved in the ongoing affairs of humanity. He's shown himself to be that kind of person throughout the MCU. He doesn't sit fights out, and by returning to the past, Steve is sitting out every fight yet to come. Well, there is plenty of other people who can deal with those threats now. Does that sound like something Steve would ever say? Look, I want to eat ice cream and watch romantic comedies with Peggy. You guys can handle this one, right? In universe, there's